When a stranger in designer boots quietly tunes the broken piano in a forgotten music room, Brielle wonders if this is just another rich man slumming it for kicks. It was the boots that gave him away, not the worn hoodie or the way he avoided eye contact with anyone who tried to welcome him. No, it was the sleek caramel-colored Italian leather boots, utterly wrong for the creaky linoleum floors of the Eleanor Carter Community Center. Brielle Monroe noticed everything, especially on Mondays. That was when the fresh volunteers showed up, usually with big smiles and bigger egos. They'd last 2 weeks tops, long enough for a social media post or a resume bullet point. This one came in without a smile. He signed the volunteer log with a tight grip and a pen that looked suspiciously like it belonged in a corporate boardroom. First name only Graham. No last name, no fuss. Mrs. Ruby, the center's octogenarian receptionist, squinted over her bifocals. "You're the one they said was coming from the city." Graham nodded once. She leaned in, conspiratorially, stage whispered, "You know how to microwave mac and cheese." His brows furrowed. "I haven't tried." Mrs. Ruby raised her painted-on eyebrows like she'd just solved a mystery. The kids whispered it before lunch was even served. "He don't know how to microwave mac and cheese." One girl giggled, slapping her friend's arm. "Bet he don't even know about Kool-Aid." Brielle ignored the noise. She was used to curious glances and occasional gossip. What mattered was what a person did once they were assigned a task. So she gave him something easy, restocking pantry shelves. Quiet, out of the way, no kids involved. If he was here to pose for pictures or do his weekly good deed, he'd be gone by Thursday. But Graham did the work, methodically, wordlessly. He wore the hoodie zipped to the chin, but the hem of a crisp designer shirt peeked through whenever he lifted his arms. Every time Brielle passed the food pantry, she found cans, alphabetized labels facing forward. He didn't complain when her directions were curt, didn't flirt, didn't ask dumb questions. He simply existed until the day she lost track of him. It was Thursday near closing. She was double-checking meal counts and grant report drafts when she realized he hadn't signed out. Not unusual, but odd for someone so exact. She found him at the far end of the west hallway, standing in front of a locked room no one touched anymore. The quiet room. That's what the older kids called it. Once upon a time, it had been the music room, a place full of donated keyboards, an old upright piano, and dreams of after-school jam sessions. Then the funding dried up. The piano broke. No one had touched the door in years, yet there he stood, key in hand, turning the knob like it was his. "Excuse me," she said sharply. Graham turned, startled. "You're not assigned to this wing." His posture straightened, but he didn't retreat. "I noticed the piano in here. Thought maybe it could be salvaged." Brielle folded her arms. "You know anything about tuning?" "A little." She studied him, skeptical. "Why would you care?" He hesitated. "Music was important to my mom. She believed every place needed a good piano." "You're not from around here, are you?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am." She arched a brow at the formality. "You planning to write a blog post about this later? Rich guy discovers small town soul?" Graham didn't smile. No blog. They stared at each other for a long beat before Brielle exhaled and handed him the key. "You break it, you fix it." He nodded, once quiet. That night, long after the other volunteers left and Jamal was finishing his homework in her office, Brielle heard something she hadn't heard in 6 years, a piano note. Crooked, off-key. But there, she stood still, one hand on the doorknob, heart thudding. The room, the one with peeling posters of Duke Ellington and Ella Fitzgerald, the one she couldn't bring herself to clean out, was waking up again. And some stranger in expensive boots was the one doing it. The next morning, Graham was already at the center before the doors officially opened. Mrs. Ruby barely had time to settle in with her sweet tea before he slipped past the front desk with a nod and that ever-present hoodie. He didn't stop to greet anyone, didn't linger by the donation bins. Instead, he walked the same quiet hallway, like it was a habit long formed. By the time Brielle arrived, he'd been inside the quiet room for 20 minutes. She could hear the creak of the bench, the tap of a tuning hammer, the occasional sour note being coaxed into place. She stood outside the door listening not just to the sounds, but to what wasn't there. No performance, no showing off, just effort. It was unsettling. She pushed the door open. Graham didn't flinch. He was crouched low, peering behind the piano with a small flashlight between his teeth. "You know there's a sign-up sheet for room use," she said dryly. He leaned back, wiped his hands on his jeans. Didn't want to waste anyone's time if it couldn't be fixed. She looked around. Dust still clung to the music stands and the corners of cracked window panes, but something about the room felt less forgotten. "Where'd you even learn to do this?" "I had a music teacher who used to fix her own instruments. I watched that." So he stood up slowly, stretching. She said, "A broken piano still has a memory. You just have to coax it back out." That made her pause. It was the kind of sentiment people threw around to sound poetic. But Graham didn't say it like that. He said it like it was his. She crossed her arms. "You keep tuning, people are going to expect a recital. I don't play in front of people." "So you do play." He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the window, nudged it open an inch, letting in the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. That afternoon, Jamal came looking for her while she was eating her packed lunch at her desk, a turkey sandwich, wrapped in wax paper, an apple, and a thermos of sweet tea. As usual. "Mom," he said, breathless, "there's a guy in the music room." She didn't look up. "I know. He's playing piano." That got her attention. "He is, like, really playing?" "But it's all quiet, like he's talking to the piano or something." Brielle stood. "You're not supposed to be down there alone, Jamal." "I wasn't. I just heard something when I went to get my notebook. I think he was playing Claire de Lune, but it sounded kind of sad." That made her stop. She hadn't heard anyone play that piece since. She grabbed her sweater and walked quickly down the hall. But by the time she opened the door to the quiet room, the music had stopped. Graham sat at the bench, hands in his lap, gaze fixed on the worn ivory keys. "You always sneak up on people?" he asked without turning. "You always play other people's pianos. This one's barely hanging on. I thought it deserved one more song." Brielle moved closer. "Claire de Lune. Huh. Not the usual after-school jam. My mother used to play it when she didn't want to cry in front of anyone." Her voice softened despite herself. She must have been something. She was. There was a long silence. Then she said, "You can't just take over a room because it's quiet." He finally turned to face her. "I wasn't trying to take over. I was trying to hear myself think." She studied him. The hoodie looked out of place here, but it hung loose around shoulders that carried more than dust. His fingers, long, clean, too precise for warehouse work, drummed lightly against his knee. "You don't belong here," she said bluntly. "You look like you got more money than time, and this place doesn't need tourists." "I'm not a tourist." "Then what are you?" He looked at the broken metronome on the shelf beside him and said softly, "Maybe just someone looking for a place where things don't break so easy." And for 1 second, Brielle didn't know what to say. Brielle had never trusted the quiet ones, the talkers, the boastful men, the ones with too much cologne and too many opinions. She could spot them a mile away and shut them down twice as fast. But the quiet ones, they were harder, slower to reveal, and sometimes the most dangerous of all. So she didn't reply to Graham's half-confession, just walked to the window and adjusted the shade like it mattered. "Volunteers don't usually go off script here," she said, her voice neutral again. "They pass out flyers, set up tables, help the kids with homework. We don't need piano repair." "I didn't come here to fix a piano," he replied. She turned. "Then why did you come?" That silence again. Not avoidance, not arrogance. Something more like caution. He stood slowly. "Maybe I thought I could be useful without explaining myself." She stepped back. People who don't explain themselves usually have the most to hide. He met her eyes. Maybe that's true. The hallway behind them echoed with the sounds of sneakers on linoleum and a burst of laughter. Kids spilling out from tutoring sessions. Mrs. Ruby calling out bingo numbers for the seniors in the next room. The building was alive again, but the quiet room, just for a moment, had become something else entirely. Not just a dusty shell, but a place where someone's silence meant more than noise. Graham took a breath like he was about to speak, but the door opened. Jamal peeked in, eyes wide. "Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt." "You didn't," Graham said gently. Brielle turned to her son. "Go help Mrs. Ruby hand out snack packs, baby. I'll be out in a minute." Jamal lingered. "You coming back to play later?" he asked Graham, not quite hiding the hope in his voice. Graham hesitated, then nodded once. "If it's okay." Jamal grinned and disappeared. When the door clicked shut, Brielle spoke again, low, steady. "You really don't know how to microwave mac and cheese?" He blinked. "Excuse me, kids were talking," said the new guy at snack duty. Asked which button was boil. Her lips twitched just a little. Graham gave the faintest shrug. "That may be true." She finally smiled just enough to crack the shell. "I'd believe it." A beat passed. Then she stepped closer, her voice more serious. "Look, I don't know who you are or what you're running from, but this place isn't a hideout. It's not a halfway house for billionaires trying to feel better about themselves." "Good," he said quietly, "because I'm not trying to feel better. I'm just trying to feel something." That hit harder than she expected. Not because of the words, but the way he said them. Like they cost him more than he could afford. Her jaw tightened. "You think you can walk in here and fix what you don't understand?" Graham didn't flinch. He looked up, eyes steady, voice low but sure. "Maybe I just want something real." And those 6 words landed in the center of her like a pebble in still water. She didn't answer, not because she didn't have something to say, but because for the first time in a long time, Brielle Monroe wasn't sure if she wanted to push someone away or figure out why he hadn't already left. Most women recognize Graham Carter from magazine covers. Brielle just thinks he asks too many questions. He asked about everything: why the vending machine only took exact change, why the kids called the South Hallway the hot zone, why Mrs. Ruby kept a mini fan pointed directly at her face, even in November. He was full of quiet observations, and unlike most men who'd passed through the center, he didn't fill silence just to be heard. Still, he was always watching. One morning, just as the sun cast long gold strips across the center's parking lot, Brielle arrived to find Jamal crouched beside Graham on the steps. Between them was an old record sleeve, the edges worn and curling like they'd survived more than one attic flood. "It's Thelonious Monk," Graham said, "not easy but soulful." Jamal flipped it over, inspecting the track list with wide-eyed curiosity. "You played this." "My dad did. I just listened." "And now?" Graham didn't answer right away. Instead, he tapped the label with his index finger, then handed the record over gently. "You've got better fingers for this stuff than I do." Brielle approached with cautious steps, coffee in one hand, keys in the other. "What's going on?" Jamal held up the record like treasure. "Mr. G gave me jazz." She arched a brow at Graham. "Mr. G, nickname," Graham replied, standing. "Wasn't my idea." "I figured." She took in the sight of them, her son practically bouncing with excitement. Graham standing there, in that same old hoodie, hands tucked into his jeans, like he had nothing better to do than talk music with a 12-year-old. That wasn't normal, at least not around here. Inside, the center buzzed with its usual rhythm. Toddlers tumbled through playmats in room 2, a group of teens argued about who ate the last fruit cup, and Miss Paulette cursed at the printer like it had wronged her family. Brielle moved through it like air, clipping her ID badge on and checking off her mental to-do list. Graham trailed behind her at a respectful distance, jotting things down in a small leather-bound notebook she hadn't seen before. When she caught him writing something after observing a tutoring session, she stopped mid-step. "Are we being reviewed?" He looked up almost sheepish. "No, just notes." "For what?" "I'm trying to learn the rhythm here." She crossed her arms. "This isn't a show." "I know," he said, quieter now. "That's why I'm listening." It unsettled her, the humility, the lack of pretense. Men like him, rich men, didn't usually bother with humility. They sent checks. They wrote press releases. They didn't sit cross-legged on linoleum floors trading jazz records with preteens. That afternoon, while wiping crayon marks off the lunch table after a messy art session, Brielle overheard two of the moms near the entrance chatting while they waited for their kids. "You seen that new guy with the hoodie? He's kinda fine." "The quiet one." "Mm-hmm. Something about him looks expensive." Brielle ducked her head and scrubbed harder. In the kitchen, Graham was helping Jamal sort snack bins. He wasn't great at it, alphabetizing granola bars by flavor instead of expiration date, but he did it with a kind of clumsy grace that didn't scream billionaire, at least not at first glance. When a juice pouch exploded, Graham immediately reached for a cloth. Brielle stepped in too, and their hands met at the same moment on the counter. Just a brush, but enough. He looked up. She didn't. Instead, she tossed the cloth toward the sink and muttered, "Next time, don't squeeze the juice like it owes you rent." Graham smiled but didn't push it. Later that week, Miss Angie's diner called. The center had accidentally double-ordered boxed lunches for the seniors, and she offered to hold them until pickup. Brielle drove over herself, not wanting to burden anyone. But Graham insisted on riding along, said he needed to see the real Savannah. The diner was small and square, with cracked leather booths and a menu board older than both of them. Locals sipped coffee with cream and nodded at Brielle like she was royalty. Miss Angie, hair wrapped in a leopard print scarf, peeked over the counter and narrowed her eyes at Graham. "Don't I know you from somewhere?" she asked, voice syrup thick. Graham just smiled politely. Probably not. But she kept looking at him long after she handed over the lunch boxes. They took a booth near the window, Graham sliding in cautiously, like the cracked vinyl might reveal something about him. Brielle sat across, scanning the laminated menu, even though she already knew what she wanted. She always got the same thing, chicken and waffles, with a side of grits, no butter. He studied the menu like it was a contract. "What's red link?" Brielle tilted her head. "You've never had sausage before?" "I've had sausage," he said, then paused. "I just didn't know it came in colors." She bit back a laugh. "It's spicy, not for tourists." He looked up. "I'm not a tourist." The words hung there, almost like a dare, but she let them pass. Miss Angie came over, pen tucked behind her ear. "Well, look who decided to show up with company." She took Brielle's order without asking, then turned to Graham. "And you, stranger, gonna try a little southern heat or play it safe with pancakes?" "I'll do what she's having," he said. Miss Angie raised an eyebrow. "That's bold." Graham offered a smile. "Or reckless." When she walked away, Brielle leaned forward, arms resting on the cool table. "You're not from around here?" "No. New York. Close. Closer than Atlanta." "Farther." She narrowed her eyes. "You always this vague. Only when I don't know the rules." "There aren't rules. There always are." She studied him for a long second, then said, "Around here the rule is, don't pretend you're nobody if you're actually somebody." He didn't blink. "What if I'd rather be nobody?" The food came just then, steaming sweet buttery in all the right ways. Miss Angie slid plates in front of them, gave Graham a suspicious once-over, and disappeared again. He watched as Brielle reached for the syrup bottle drizzled with practiced precision. She cut her waffle cleanly, no fuss, like someone used to feeding others before herself. She noticed him staring. "You write that in your little notebook too?" she asked, her tone dry. He reached into his pocket and set the leather-bound journal on the table. "No," he said. "Some things you keep here." He tapped his temple. "Or here." He tapped his chest. Brielle looked at the notebook, but didn't touch it. They ate in mostly silence, broken only by the occasional clink of fork on ceramic and the low murmur of other diners. Outside, the street was quiet sun brushing gold across the tops of parked cars and leaf-strewn sidewalks. When they finished, Graham stood to pay. Brielle moved toward the counter too, already pulling out a folded $10 bill from her pocket. "I've got it," he said quickly. She hesitated. "You don't have to." "I know," he said gently but firmly. "I want to." She let him this time, but she watched. He handed Miss Angie a few crisp bills, too crisp, and she gave him a look like she'd just smelled something too sweet. When he turned back toward Brielle, she was already shaking her head. What he asked. "You tipped her 20. She was kind. She was nosy. She still brought us food." Brielle crossed her arms. "This ain't New York. Don't throw money around like that." People talk. He looked genuinely puzzled. Isn't that a good thing? Not if you're trying to be nobody. They stood at the door, the bell above it quieting as it settled. He glanced outside where the breeze rustled leaves against the sidewalk like paper secrets. Then he turned to her and asked softer this time, "What does someone have to do around here to earn a little grace?" Brielle didn't answer right away, didn't scoff or walk away or let him off easy. Instead, she just looked at him for real this time. And for the first time since he showed up in that ragged hoodie with rich boy shoes and too many silences, she wasn't entirely sure he was pretending anymore. That night, the center slowed into its quieter rhythm, the one Brielle liked best. The fluorescent buzz dimmed as kids were picked up, toys were stacked, and sticky tables wiped clean. Brielle stood in her office doorway, watching Jamal crouched over a small stack of worksheets, headphones half on fingers, tapping a rhythm she couldn't hear. She had offered to take him home, but he wanted to stay a little longer. Said he had thinking to do. She didn't push. From the far end of the hallway came faint music again. That same wandering melody. The one she'd started recognizing even when she couldn't name it. She followed the sound drawn like a moth until she reached the quiet room. The door was half open. Inside, Graham sat at the old piano, his back slightly hunched, fingers gentle on the keys like they weren't meant to play, but to remember. He wasn't playing for an audience. That much was obvious. This was something else, something private. He stopped when he saw her, didn't flinch. Just removed his hands from the keys and looked up. "You always sneak in here after hours," she asked, folding her arms. "I thought no one came in this room." "They don't," she said. "Except you." He nodded once almost to himself. "It's quiet," he said. "That's the point." Jamal appeared behind her, eyes wide. "That's Monk, right?" he asked. "From the record." Graham gave a small smile. "You've been listening." Brielle placed a hand gently on her son's shoulder. "Time to go." Jamal pouted but didn't argue. "You can use this room tomorrow," Graham said, addressing the boy now. "If your mom's okay with it." Jamal looked up at her. "Please." "We'll see," she replied, her voice careful. Jamal slipped away to grab his backpack, leaving them alone again. Brielle stepped further into the room, her boots soft against the old tile. "You really expect me to believe you're just some guy with a piano hobby?" she asked. "No," Graham said, "but I'm not lying." She raised an eyebrow. "You expect me to trust that?" "No." He stood gently lowering the piano lid until it clicked shut. "But I'm trying." She exhaled slowly. "Look, I don't care if you're running from a hedge fund scandal or if you're some disgraced CEO playing St. Graham in Savannah. But these kids, this place," she gestured around them. "It's not your redemption story." "I know that." "Do you?" He stepped closer just enough that she could see the lines fatigue had drawn under his eyes. "I don't want to fix anything," he said. "Not the center, not the piano, not you." Her jaw tensed. "I just," he faltered, then tried again. "I just want something that's not curated. Something honest." She shook her head. "You think you can walk in here and fix what you don't understand." There it was, the wall she always built when someone got too close. And he didn't try to knock it down. He didn't raise his voice or offer platitudes. He just looked at her. Then quietly he said, "Maybe I just want something real." In a town where everyone knows your name, Graham is finally invited to something that doesn't require RSVP or a donation. He showed up early, too early if Brielle were to be honest, but he came with a pie in hand. The foil edges crimped imperfectly, and the smell of cinnamon and burnt crust following him in like a hopeful apology. "Sweet potato," he said, setting it down on the long table by the wall, which already held 5 other pies, 3 store-bought, 1 lopsided, and 1 clearly the work of someone's grandma. Brielle glanced at it, then at him. "You baked?" He nodded. YouTube said it was foolproof. Mrs. Ruby passed by, carrying a tray of cornbread muffins, and stopped to eye the pie. "Funny how strangers become family over casseroles and cornbread," she said, more to herself than anyone but Graham smiled anyway. The center looked different today. Warmer somehow. String lights borrowed from someone's wedding flickered overhead. Folding tables stretched in rows, each covered in mismatched tablecloths, pumpkin prints, faded florals solid brown. Kids ran past with streamers and paper turkeys taped to their backs, laughing like this wasn't the same place where they waited in line for donated backpacks 2 months ago. Graham helped Elder Harris unfold another chair. Mr. G, one of the kids, yelled from across the room. "Come play tag." Later he called back laughing before turning to Elder Harris. "They named me already." "That's how you know you belong," the older man said, smiling beneath his salt and pepper beard. They stood side by side for a moment, Graham listening more than talking, which was becoming his habit. Elder Harris talked about jazz records and broken lawn chairs and how young people didn't season their food right anymore. Graham nodded, absorbing it all. Not performing, not networking, just present. Across the room, Brielle caught the scene and paused. She was refilling cups at the drink station, sweet tea and pink lemonade, and for a second she just watched him. He wasn't talking to impress. He wasn't even glancing to see who noticed. That unsettled her more than charm ever could. She turned back to the tea before her thoughts drifted too far. Later, as guests arrived and music played low in the background, people formed lines for food. Brielle made a plate for Jamal chicken mac and cheese, a scoop of green bean casserole, and handed it to him with a kiss to the top of his head. "Go find a seat, baby," she said. He found Graham instead. "Try my mom's mac," Jamal said, offering a forkful like a challenge. Graham bit down, winced slightly, and then grinned. "Okay, that's unfairly good." Jamal beamed. "Told you." Then came the moment no one planned, the kind that only happens when joy overflows its container. Miss Evelyn, 83, and twice as lively as her age, aloud, lifted her phone to live stream for her niece in Detroit. She caught Graham mid-spin dancing with 3 children who had tied paper feathers to his back. He had no idea he was being recorded. He was just dancing. Brielle, walking behind them with a stack of empty cups, caught the scene. She froze. There he was, flannel sleeves rolled to the elbows, apron, askew, kids giggling around him, and him completely unguarded. She found herself smiling, not politely, not out of obligation or irony, but involuntarily, like her mouth betrayed her heart. And just like that, the smallest crack appeared in the armor she'd spent years building. The music shifted to an old Al Green tune, scratchy but soulful, and the room seemed to sway with it. Graham eventually sank into a chair beside Elder Harris, winded but smiling as a paper turkey feather slipped from his back. Across the room, Brielle filled another tray of food for the last stragglers coming in. She moved with efficiency, sleeves pushed up, earrings catching the soft light. She didn't notice Miss Angie approaching until the woman nudged her with a hip. "Girl," Miss Angie said, balancing a plate of cobbler, "either you blinking too much, or I just saw you grin at that man like he fried the best chicken you ever tasted." Brielle scoffed, brushing crumbs off her hands. "Don't start." "I ain't starting, just observing," Miss Angie said, eyes narrowing. "And what I'm observing is that maybe, just maybe, you not made of concrete after all." Brielle rolled her eyes, but didn't bother denying it. By the dessert table, Graham stood again, helping Mrs. Ruby find her cane. She had dropped it trying to carry 2 cups of cider and a slice of pecan pie. "Didn't mean to make a mess," she said. "No mess at all," Graham replied, steadying her arm. "Besides, I heard spilled cider brings good luck." She laughed. "That's the most southern nonsense I've ever heard." "Just trying to blend in." Brielle, watching nearby, let her gaze linger a second longer than she meant to. There was something disarming about how naturally he moved among them now. Not flawlessly, he still said ma'am too often and didn't know what chow chow was, but earnestly. He didn't hide behind polished language or perform like he used to. Instead, he listened and laughed and messed up without flinching. When everyone finally sat down, Graham found himself wedged between Jamal and Elder Harris. The boy was mid-story about a music app he loved gesturing with his fork, while his sweet tea threatened to tip over. "I played that song you showed me," Jamal said, "the one with the weird time signature." Graham smiled. "Thelonious Monk." "It's not weird, it's genius." Elder Harris chuckled. "Boy's got a good ear. Don't spoil him with too much jazz too fast. Let him learn to hear the silence too." Brielle, now seated across the room, caught that line. She couldn't help but glance up. It reminded her of something her grandfather once said before things fell apart. Miss Evelyn's live stream had long ended, but she kept showing people the clip she'd recorded. "Look at this man," she said proudly, replaying the video on her phone. "Dancing like he born here." Brielle shook her head as the kids squealed in delight, watching themselves twirl around Graham's tall frame. Mr. G, one shouted, "You promised seconds," on what he called back, "everything." The room filled with laughter, plates clinked, voices rose and folded into each other. It was chaos. It was imperfect. And it was home. At some point during cleanup, Brielle found herself beside Graham, at the sink, elbow to elbow, rinsing stubborn casserole pans. "I think you earned your stripes today," she said without looking at him. "Good," he said. "I was worried the pie might disqualify me." She smirked. It was not the worst thing on that table. That's high praise. Silence lingered a beat too long, but not uncomfortably. "You ever do this in your old life?" she asked finally. "Get your hands this dirty?" "Not since college," he admitted. "But I never liked the clean kind of life much." She glanced at him, studying the side of his face, the way he genuinely seemed present. "Then why live it?" He shrugged. "Because I was expected to." Jamal darted into the kitchen, cheeks sticky with syrup. "Mom, I put foil on the pies like you said." "Good," she said. "Now go wash your hands before you touch anything else." As he ran off, Graham dried his hands on a towel, then turned to her. "Brielle," he said. She looked up, but before he could say whatever he was thinking, her phone buzzed on the counter. A message. She wiped her hand and checked it, frowning. From Charlotte. 4 words. "You know who that man really is, right?" Brielle stared at the message longer than necessary. The music still played faintly from the main room. Someone was laughing, Miss Angie probably, and Graham was rinsing one last baking tray like nothing had changed. But something had. She didn't answer the text. Not yet. "Everything okay?" Graham asked, nodding toward her phone. Brielle forced a shrug. Just someone checking in. He didn't push, and she appreciated that more than she wanted to admit. But inside, something was already unraveling. Something cautious, ancient, protective. She'd learned long ago not to take things at face value. Pretty words, gentle eyes. People could wear kindness like a costume. She knew that, and yet, across the hall, Jamal had started a game of charades with 3 of the younger kids. Graham wandered over, kneeling beside the boy, to guess exaggerated arm flapping and squawking. "Angry turkey," he guessed. "No," Jamal groaned. "It's a chicken on a scooter, Mr. G, come on." Everyone dissolved into laughter, and Brielle let out a quiet sigh. The moment felt so sweet it could have cracked. Back in her office, under the guise of grabbing foil and extra paper plates, Brielle finally opened Charlotte's text again. There was a second message now. "Google his name. Graham Carter. You'll see." Brielle didn't. Not yet. She just sat at her desk, the hum of the fluorescent light above her head, the only sound. She knew Charlotte's tone too well, always laced with superiority, always arriving when you were happiest, like a gift-wrapped reminder that joy had limits. Charlotte had never approved of the center. "You pour into people who'll never remember your name," she'd once said. And for what? For this, Brielle thought, listening to the muffled sound of children's laughter and dishes clinking in the background. She returned to the gathering, this time more measured, watching Graham without being obvious. He wasn't pretending. That's what unnerved her most. He wasn't trying to win anyone, he was just there. Real. By evening, the food had dwindled to crumbs, and the children slumped against mismatched chairs in sugar comas. Miss Evelyn tried to collect the plasticware. Mrs. Ruby dozed off, holding an empty cup of cider. Brielle handed Graham a take-home plate. "You earned it." He smiled. "You too." They stood at the threshold of the center, the cool night air brushing in through the cracked door. Graham rubbed his hands together, then reached into his coat pocket, retrieving a folded napkin. He held it out to her. She raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Notes," he said. "For the next time I try to cook sweet potato pie. Elder Harris told me I used the wrong kind of sugar." She took the napkin, unfolding it. Scrawled in neat, slightly slanted writing were corrections ideas, and even a doodle of a misshapen pie with a sad face. Brielle chuckled. You really came prepared. I'm trying, he said quietly. I want to get it right. Their eyes met for a beat. No words, just the subtle charge of shared effort, of two people not asking for anything but a fair look. Then Jamal burst out the front door. Mom, they said we can keep the paper decorations. That's fine, she called back, still watching Graham. He hesitated before speaking again, this time softer, more unsure. Brielle. She tilted her head, half expecting another joke, maybe something about pie. Instead, his voice dropped. What does someone have to do around here to earn a little grace? The rain started Monday and didn't let up. It fell in long, sullen sheets that blurred the sidewalks of Savannah into watercolor. The roof of the community center, patched more times than Brielle could count, moaned under the weight of water, especially over the east wing where the forgotten music room lay. Buckets appeared like clockwork, scattered like tired soldiers, catching slow, steady drips. Inside, the staff moved a little slower. Kids stayed indoors, longer tempers flared quicker. And Brielle. She ran on too little sleep and too many questions. Ms. Monroe, Mrs. Ruby, said from behind her desk, pointing with a pencil, that ceiling's about to give birth to a whole new river. Brielle looked up at the sagging panel and exhaled. Add it to the list. Lists got more entries than the church cookbook, and just as much drama. Mrs. Ruby grinned, then lowered her voice. Rain brings more than leaks, you know. Every time it pours like this, truths fall out the sky. Brielle paused. That one of your southern sayings? That one's mine. She winked. In the hallway, Graham shook out his umbrella, the good kind black leather handle, subtle initials carved into the brass tip. He leaned it in the corner beside Brielle's beat-up plastic one, the kind you bought at a gas station when your car battery was already dying. The difference in umbrellas said more than either of them liked to admit. Jamal zipped past them, both headphones around his neck, jazz notes leaking into the air. Hey, Brielle called your lunch. Later, Mom. She shook her head and turned to Graham. He thinks Miles Davis is food now. He's not entirely wrong, Graham said, cracking the first smile of the day. But it didn't land the way it might have last week. Not after the text from Charlotte. Not after the way Brielle's stomach had twisted when she finally gave in and searched his name. Graham Carter. She found magazine spreads, finance blogs, even a photo of him in front of a high-rise with his arm around some tech CEO. No arrests, no scandals. But still lies of omission left their own scars. Now each moment between them felt suspended like a note held too long without resolution. That afternoon, a new email pinged into her inbox. The subject line read, Tip Graham Carter, spotted at local center. She stared at it unmoving until thunder cracked outside and the power flickered once like the building itself had shivered. She clicked the message. Just a short note from a lifestyle blogger in Savannah. Hi, Brielle. I run a column on locals doing great work. Someone said billionaire Graham Carter's been volunteering at your center. Is that true? Could we feature him? She didn't reply. Instead, she walked to the music room. Heart-racing palms already clenched. Graham was inside, sitting at the piano with his sleeves rolled up, carefully moving the bucket closer to the keys, where a steady drip echoed like a slow metronome. He looked up when she entered. Hey, he said, voice soft. I think it's leaking faster now. She didn't answer. She shut the door behind her and folded her arms. You lied, she said. He blinked. What? Don't play dumb, Graham. A blogger just emailed me. Graham Carter, you didn't even change your name. His face fell, not in guilt, but in weariness. I didn't lie. I just didn't lead with it. Right, she said, voice rising. You just showed up in designer boots with a fancy umbrella, asking questions like a researcher on sabbatical. I came here to get away from all of that. And I'm just the experiment that makes you feel grounded. He stood, hands up. No. Brielle, listen. This wasn't about you. I mean, he corrected himself, stepping closer. I didn't come here for you. I came because I was tired of being someone I didn't respect. And we're your charity project, your redemption arc. No, he said, quieter now. This isn't about running away. This is me, finally, walking towards something real. Outside, thunder rolled again, low and heavy. Inside, Brielle stared at him, with eyes that no longer held curiosity, only a hard-earned caution. The kind of look built from too many promises broken, and too many people showing up with just enough kindness to ruin you. Brielle turned toward the window, where rain streaked down like tears no one had the nerve to shed. Her arms stayed crossed, a barrier as firm as her voice. "You know what this place is to me?" she asked, low and measured. "It's not just walls and chipped tile. This place saved me, gave Jamal a home when nobody else would. We don't play pretend here. We don't try people on like coats to see if they fit our guilt." Graham's face tightened. "I wasn't pretending." "Then what were you doing, Graham?" Her voice cracked just slightly. "Because every minute you were in this building, someone trusted you. You think Jamal can afford another grown man walking out of his life?" He flinched. The question landed harder than she expected. "I've made mistakes," he said, quieter. "My name opened doors I didn't earn. My money fixed problems I never had to feel. But this," he motioned around the room toward the leaking ceiling, the old piano, the dented heater wheezing in the corner. "This is the first place I've wanted to stay without owning anything." Brielle let that settle. The drip from the ceiling punctuated the silence between them. Then softly, "This center isn't your redemption story. That did it." He blinked, like the words had stung, in a place he didn't realize was still raw. Then he nodded slowly, like he accepted a sentence he'd been expecting. "I understand." "No," she said. "I don't think you do." He stepped back from the piano, his shoes making the faintest creak on the warped wood floor. His gaze flicked once to the ceiling, then down to the instrument, as if it might speak for him. Then he left. Just like that, no door slam, no protest. Just the quiet exit of a man who no longer had permission to stay. Brielle stood still for a long while. The sound of her own breath seemed too loud. She told herself this was good. This was necessary. Boundaries were strength. And yet the room felt colder the moment he was gone. Later that evening, when the last kid was picked up and the lights dimmed across the center, Brielle returned to the music room, just to make sure the buckets hadn't overflowed. That's when she saw the note, folded in half and resting gently on the middle C of the piano, like it had been placed with reverence. She hesitated before opening it. His handwriting was neat, small, deliberate. "I didn't lie. I just wanted to feel small for once." She stood there, the paper soft in her fingers, thunder rolling again in the distance. For the first time all day, she didn't have a reply. By the time Brielle locked the doors and stepped outside, the rain had softened to a steady mist, the kind that didn't drench, but clung to skin and thought alike. Her fingers curled around the folded note in her coat pocket, the words echoing longer than she cared to admit. "I just wanted to feel small for once." She should have thrown it away, crumpled it like any other excuse someone had left behind. But it stayed in her hand all the way to her car, all the way home. Jamal was already asleep, his headphones askew, a Miles Davis record spinning faintly in the corner. The jazz notes floated into the room like half-formed memories. Brielle toed off her shoes and sat at the edge of the couch. For once, the silence wasn't peace, it was weight. Her mind replayed the day like a scratched tape, Graham's face when she accused him, the way he didn't fight back, the note, the rain. She hadn't told him about the blogger. She hadn't said how many nights she'd Googled his name, then closed the tab like it burned. She hadn't admitted that deep down a part of her had already known, because men like Graham didn't walk into community centers unless they wanted to feel better about themselves, unless they were trying to fix something broken in themselves or someone else. And she refused to be either. But that didn't explain the way he looked at Jamal, or the way Jamal had started asking deeper questions about chords, about phrasing, about what it meant to play from the gut and not just the keys. It didn't explain the quiet moments, the laughter that didn't feel forced, the way Graham never tried to impress, he simply showed up, again and again, until today. The next morning, Savannah wore a thin fog like a scarf around its neck. Brielle arrived early to the center, expecting nothing, needing routine. Mrs. Ruby was already there, sorting mail. "Morning," she chirped. "Sleep." "Not really." Mrs. Ruby peered over her glasses. "That man ain't been by this morning." "I didn't ask." "You didn't have to." They exchanged a look. It was short, but knowing the kind women shared when too much had been felt in too little time. In the quiet room, the piano stood still, but beside it, propped carefully against the leg, was something unexpected. Graham's umbrella, still beaded with dried rain. Leather handle turned outward, like it had been left deliberately. She crouched down slowly, brushing her fingers along the edge. It was absurd to feel a lump rise in her throat over a thing so trivial. But it wasn't the umbrella. It was what it meant. He had walked away and left something behind. Again. The day wore on. Kids came and went, laughter returned to the halls, papers fluttered in the copier. But inside, her Brielle felt like she was waiting for what she didn't know. That evening, while checking the last of the supplies in the office, her phone buzzed. Unknown number, one message. "I'm sorry for showing up wrong. I'm still learning what it means to show up right. If you'll let me try again, I'll be back after the rain." No name, no photo. But she knew. She didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, she walked down the hall, opened the music room door, and stared at the piano one more time. The note was gone, but the air still held its echo. When silence stretches too long, even a community center starts to notice who's missing. By the second week of December, Graham's absence was no longer just a detail. It was a shadow that moved through the center's hallways, brushing past conversations, lingering in empty chairs. The kids still asked about Mr. G, but more softly now, as if unsure if they were allowed. Jamal, for his part, hadn't said his name once, but Brielle had caught him lingering near the quiet room, more than once, fingers tracing silent scales on air. The piano oddly stayed in tune. Miss Angie, ever one to speak her mind, said it plainly, as she poured Brielle a cup of cinnamon tea behind the cafe counter one slow Thursday morning. "Rich folks come and go," she muttered, wiping the same spot on the counter for the third time. "But something tells me he didn't plan on going." Brielle didn't respond, just wrapped her hands around the cup and let the steam blur the window pane. Outside, fairy lights blinked lazily along the edges of the cafe roof, their glow bouncing off the river like tiny memories. Somewhere in the corner, an old guitarist plucked the first few notes of "A Change Is Gonna Come." The air held that peculiar hush Savannah wore in December, like the city was waiting for something to break open. Her phone buzzed, not a message, a calendar notification. "Winter recital rehearsal. Check 0 p.m. She sighed. One more thing to juggle. Back at the center, things were busier than ever. Winter donations poured in. Coats lined the hall racks. Kids practiced carols off key. And still the only person who hadn't returned was the one who never asked to be recognized in the first place. It was Elder Harris who finally cornered her by the storage closet. "You got a minute?" he asked, voice gentle, but with that firm undercurrent she'd never known how to ignore. "Barely," she replied, adjusting a box in her arms. He didn't move. "Then make one." She followed him into the side office, expecting to find a volunteer chart or donation issue. Instead, he slid a set of printed documents across the desk. "What's this?" "Something you should see before Charlotte Vance sees it first." Her heart jumped before she could stop it. On the top sheet, Graham Carter Foundation. Community Trust Gift Agreement. Brielle blinked. "What the—" "Keep reading," he said. She did, and with every line her breath grew shallower. The donation was significant enough to fix the Roof Expand programming and finally open that music outreach program she'd dreamed of. But what stopped her cold wasn't the amount. It was the name of the trust. The James and Celeste Monroe Memorial Fund. Her parents, long gone. Two names she hadn't heard outside her own lips in years. She leaned back slowly, fingers trembling against the edge of the desk. "He didn't tell me," she whispered. Elder Harris smiled, eyes kind. "Didn't tell any of us. Just asked me how to do it quietly. Said he didn't want applause, just to leave something standing." Before she could respond, the center phone rang. Miss Ruby answered, then peeked in through the office doorway. "You might want to see this." She followed her to the front desk where an envelope waited. Hand delivered. No return address. Inside, a letterhead from a high-end law firm, Charlotte Vance's. It was short, terse. Mr. Graham Carter does not consent to his likeness being used in any community marketing, social media, or publications related to the Monroe Center. Kindly remove all mentions immediately. Further contact will be made through legal counsel. Brielle read it twice. Then, without a word, she folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and walked outside. The cold air bit harder than expected, making her scarf feel too thin. She didn't know where she was going until she was there, the Riverside Cafe. And there he was, sitting alone under a patio heater's steam curling from a black coffee he hadn't touched. No book, no laptop, just stillness and the slow, distant hum of a guitar's fading song. Graham didn't look up until her shadow crossed the table. "I almost thought you wouldn't come," he said quietly. She didn't sit. "I got a letter," she said. He nodded. "I figured it'd reach you first. Charlotte's going to make noise." "I know." She stared at him, at the tired eyes and the way his hands wrapped around the cup like it might keep him grounded. "Why my parents' names?" she asked. His mouth curved, not quite a smile, more like memory. "Because they mattered to you. And I wanted this to be about something real, not about me." He reached into his coat and slid a manila folder across the table. Inside, neatly tabbed, were all the trust papers. Signed, filed, final. "No strings," he said. "No press, no story, just gratitude." She didn't touch the folder, didn't touch her tea, didn't say yes, but didn't say no. Instead, she sat down across from him, the air thick with everything unsaid. After a long pause, she looked up. "Come to the recital," she said, "if you still believe in the music." Brielle didn't wait for his response. She stood up her chair, scraping softly against the pavement, and tucked the folder under her arm. Graham didn't move, didn't try to explain further. The silence between them was no longer hostile, just dense, full. She walked away with the recital hanging like a question in the air. Back at the center, everything moved as it always did. Kids coloring at the craft table, Elder Harris lecturing someone gently about respect, and Mrs. Ruby humming off-key while stuffing envelopes. But something was different. A space had shifted. It wasn't about Graham, not exactly. It was about what he represented. Someone asked if Mr. G is still coming to the Christmas play. Jamal said that night at home, staring at his mashed potatoes. Brielle paused. "What did you say?" He shrugged. "I said I don't know, but he still hasn't taught me how to play Autumn Leaves all the way through." She smiled small and quiet. "Maybe he will." Jamal looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "You think so?" I said. "Maybe," she said. But she was already thinking about the folder in her closet drawer, the name of her parents on crisp paper, and a man who hadn't asked for anything in return. 2 days later, Elder Harris stopped her near the hallway bulletin board. "You know that recital program ain't gonna print itself." "I'm working on it," she replied, flipping through the list of performers. Then she paused. "Add one more slot. At the end." He raised an eyebrow. "Someone special." "Nobody special," she said. "But the kids might want a final song they can all hum to." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. At the Riverside Cafe, Graham returned twice more that week, sitting at the same corner table, always alone. Miss Angie served him without comment, just refilled his coffee, and left an extra napkin with a smiley face drawn in red pen. "He don't say much," she later told Brielle, "but he tips like he thinks I saved his life." That Sunday, Charlotte Vance showed up in person. Her heels clicked across the community center floor like she owned it. She looked out of place, designer coat, clutch, purse, lips tight enough to cut glass. Brielle didn't bother with pleasantries. "I received your letter," she said flatly. Charlotte folded her arms, and I'm not using his image. I never intended to. Charlotte studied her. "You know who he is." "I know enough." Charlotte tilted her head. "You're smarter than this. Men like Graham are always running from something, and they don't stop running just because they find a cute little charity project." Brielle didn't flinch. "This center isn't a project. It's a home. And if he treated it like one for even a moment, then that's more than most of you did." Charlotte blinked. Then she smiled. Cold, He'll get bored. They always do. Maybe, Brielle replied, but he's already done more with silence than most do with spotlights. Charlotte turned on her heel and left. Mrs. Ruby peeked out from the mailroom as the door closed. I don't like her, she said helpfully. Brielle laughed for the first time in days. That night, as the rain finally let up and stars peeked cautiously through Georgia skies, she pulled out the folder again. Reread every word. She didn't understand Graham. Not fully. But maybe she didn't have to. Maybe it was enough that for once someone had left something behind, not because they wanted forgiveness, but because they wanted to give. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth more than any apology. The next morning the sky wore a softer hue, less gray, more promise. The center smelled of fresh coffee and the kind of hope only December seemed to bring. Pine cones lined the windowsills, and children taped construction paper snowflakes above the library shelves. Brielle moved through it all with practiced calm, clipboard in hand, mind elsewhere. Mrs. Ruby leaned over the front desk. Got a delivery for you, she said, pushing a slim envelope across the counter. Left at the door. No name. Brielle opened it carefully. Inside was a note written in smooth, clean script. The fund is already live. The trust bears no connection to me publicly per your concerns, but it bears your parents' names because their legacy is bigger than either of us. G. Underneath, clipped to the note, was a small black and white photo, her parents in front of the original center building all those years ago. Her father smiling wide, her mother holding a clipboard like she owned the world. Her throat tightened. Later that afternoon, she took a walk along the river. The cafe was half full, warm lights glowing against the chill. Graham sat outside, shoulders hunched against the wind, sipping his usual black coffee. A guitarist plucked "A Change Is Gonna Come" on the sidewalk nearby, the melody familiar and aching. He looked up as Brielle approached, surprised but still as if afraid moving might startle the moment away. She sat down across from him, said nothing at first. Then you kept the note short. He chuckled once. Didn't think you'd want paragraphs. You were right. They sat in silence, the music filling in what words couldn't. I spoke with Charlotte, Brielle said finally. I'm sorry, Graham replied, voice low. She thinks this place was just something for you to hide behind. And what do you think? She looked at him carefully. I think maybe you were trying to build something to stand in front of for once. He turned the paper cup in his hands. I didn't lie to you. I know. He paused. I just wanted to do something that wasn't about my name. Brielle watched him for a moment longer, then reached into her coat pocket and slid a folded recital program across the table. He unfolded it. His eyes scanned the page until they landed on the last slot at the bottom finale. Autumn Leaves, arranged by Mr. G and students. No story, she said. No press, just the music. He nodded slowly, and just before she stood to leave, she leaned in a little closer, the wind catching her curls. Come to the recital if you still believe in the music. Then she turned, coat flaring slightly, and walked back into the chill December dusk, leaving him there with the program in hand and the song of change still drifting behind her. In a room filled with music, they finally let silence say what words never could. It was the first weekend of December, and Savannah shimmered. Golden lights draped from porch rails and storefronts, while lampposts wore wreaths like warm invitations. Even the sidewalks seemed to hum with a softer rhythm, as if the city itself had slowed to listen. Inside the community center, the air smelled of cinnamon and something sweeter, anticipation. Children tugged at the sleeves of parents, their paper snowflake decorations fluttering on the walls. A string of soft blue lights framed the entry to the music room, and beside it stood a small wooden plaque, still covered in a velvet cloth. In the lobby, Brielle checked her clipboard for what felt like the 100th time. Her curls were pinned neatly, and her burgundy dress clung softly at the sleeves. Not showy, just right. Your boy's got butterflies, Mrs. Ruby said with a wink as she passed by, balancing a tray of hot cider. But he's pretending it's just the cider. Brielle smiled. He'll be fine. Mrs. Ruby paused, looking toward the newly polished door of the music room. Some names don't need a plaque to matter, but I'm glad this one gets one. Brielle didn't reply. She just looked at the velvet cloth and nodded. In the music room, no, the Carter room, as it would soon be known, Jamal sat at the piano, fingers flexing over the keys. The bench had been wiped down, the floor waxed until it shined, but the most important change wasn't physical. The room was no longer empty. It was full of chairs, full of people, full of presence. And somewhere near the back, Graham Carter stood leaning against the doorframe, a quiet figure in a navy sweater and pressed slacks. He didn't wear his usual hoodie. He didn't need to. His eyes stayed on the stage, not seeking anyone in particular, just witnessing. Jamal glanced at him once. Graham gave the boy a small nod. That was all. The recital began with group songs, children in red sweaters singing, off-key, but with full hearts. Laughter rippled across the room as one toddler belted the chorus half a beat too soon. Then it was Jamal's turn. He stepped onto the small platform, feet uncertain but eyes steady. He sat, adjusted the piano bench, and exhaled. Then his fingers touched the keys. It wasn't perfect, but it was true. His version of Lean on Me rang clear, hesitant in the beginning, but rising with quiet confidence, like a boy who'd found not just notes, but meaning. Every note was a thank you. Every pause, a breath of forgiveness. Brielle watched from the wings, hands clasped, heart too full for words. In the crowd, Elder Harris closed his eyes and swayed gently. Miss Angie wiped under her glasses and whispered, "Lord, that boy's got a gift." When Jamal finished, there was no polite applause. There was thunder, foot-stomping, whistling, clapping that echoed down the hallway and out into the December night. Brielle stepped forward, holding the microphone with a grace that was hers alone. "We say thank you," she began, her voice calm, sure. "To every parent, every elder, every child who gives this place its heartbeat. Tonight we also honor names that live quietly in the walls. My parents whose dream built this room. And another name, one that never asked for attention, but gave anyway." She turned and reached for the velvet cloth. A small tug. Underneath, carved into smooth dark wood, the Carter room. A gift in silence. A home in sound. The crowd stood again. Not for the money, not for the name, but for the truth of it all. And Graham, still at the back, just lowered his head and closed his eyes. When the applause finally faded, the crowd began to drift like warm smoke, slow smiling, lingering. Parents wrapped scarves around sleepy kids, volunteers gathered trays and cups, and Miss Angie tried with theatrical failure to wrangle the toddlers into a group photo. Brielle stepped down from the stage, her heels clicking against the polished floor, each step deliberate. Her fingers brushed the smooth edge of the plaque again, as if confirming it was real. "I didn't know you could cry through your fingertips," Elder Harris said softly, appearing at her side. She chuckled, brushing the corners of her eyes. "Was it that obvious?" He didn't answer, just squeezed her shoulder once, then moved toward the back where Graham still stood, quiet, unmoving hands deep in his coat pockets. A local news crew lingered near the hallway. Their camera had panned across the crowd, catching children dancing, elders clapping, and just a brief glimpse of a man near the shadows. Nothing more. Graham had stayed in the background. That had been the unspoken promise. But even shadows have weight. When Brielle finally approached him, her steps didn't falter. Not like before. He looked up only when she stopped a few feet away. No small talk, no pleasantries. "You didn't stay away," she said. "I almost did," he replied. His voice was low, deeper than usual, like something inside him had settled. She studied him for a beat. "You could have sent someone else. Paid for someone else to fix the roof. Bought us a new piano. But you came back." "I didn't want to just fix the room," he said. "I wanted to be here when it started breathing again." There was no music now, no one speaking, just the sound of children's laughter somewhere in the lobby and the soft creak of a folding chair being put away. "You know," she said, eyes searching, "as this center wasn't built for show. It was built for survival, for people who never had backup plans." "I know," he said without flinching. "Then why help us?" He didn't answer at first. "Then because this place did more for me in a month than my own family name ever did in a lifetime." Something in her chest stirred. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something gentler than anger. A loosening. You didn't ask for your name on that plaque, she said, but the kids started calling it that anyway. Mr. G's room. It stuck. I don't need the name, he said quietly, just the music. She glanced back at the piano. Jamal had left his music sheets there, neatly folded. Jamal asked if you were coming tonight, she added. Graham smiled. And what did you say? I said, if he really believes in the music, he will. He looked down at his shoes. They were damp at the edges, maybe from earlier rain, maybe from standing too long. I'm still learning how to show up, he said, but I'm here. There was a long pause. No one moved. No one interrupted. And then Brielle stepped forward just once. You didn't fix the room, she whispered. You made it matter again. He looked up. She didn't reach for him. But he did, and this time she didn't pull away. Outside the center, the holiday lights of Savannah flickered with quiet pride. Strings of gold and red wrapped the lampposts, swaying gently in the coastal breeze. Laughter spilled onto the sidewalk as families hugged goodbye, promising to see each other again before the new year. But inside the world slowed. Graham and Brielle stood in the doorway of the music room, the Carter room now watching the last few stragglers clean up the recital remnants, folded programs, paper snowflakes that had come unpinned from the windows, the leftover cider in plastic cups. Neither said anything for a while. The room behind them still smelled faintly of cinnamon and floor wax. The stage lights had dimmed to soft amber, casting long shadows across the piano bench where Jamal had sat. I used to think silence was empty, Graham finally said. Something to fill. Something to fix. Brielle didn't respond right away. She traced her finger along the edge of the door frame, the one she had painted herself 2 summers ago when the center couldn't afford professional touch-ups. And now she asked, her voice low. Now, he said, I think silence might be where the truth lives. She turned toward him, her eyes holding steady. You know what people will say? About you. About us. He nodded. Let them. Brielle breathed in slowly, the kind of breath that feels like a choice. A beginning. She took 1 step closer, and then another, close enough to see the wear on his collar, the tired crease near his jaw, the quiet that had become a part of him, not out of fear, but from intention. He didn't reach first. She did. Her hand moved gently, naturally, until it found his. His fingers, cold at first, tightened around hers, not possessive, not dramatic, just present. He looked down at their hands, then up at her, and said nothing. She didn't speak either. There were no declarations, no sweeping music in the background, no audience left to applaud. Just stillness, and for once it was enough. He reaches for her hand. She lets him hold it. Nothing more is said. In the quiet room, once forgotten, a melody returned, not just from the piano, but from the people who dared to believe in one another. What began as skepticism grew into something gentler, something honest, shaped by moments too small to headline and too human to ignore. When we stop judging by what someone wears, owns, or hides, we open the door to something deeper, understanding without condition, kindness without agenda. Like the soft glow of holiday lights on a rainy street, compassion doesn't ask for applause, it simply waits to be noticed. If this story touched you, let its quiet warmth ripple outward. Sometimes a stranger's quiet act of care is the first note in someone else's song.